Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Alan Saly. I'm on the board of directors of the New York Region Pathwork. And it's my privilege to introduce, welcome Aimee to give a presentation about the guide's concept of evil in the Pathwork lectures, which I think the guide shed some very important insights about evil that we don't see anywhere else, really. Some of these insights, hey, Deborah, how are you? Some of these insights um, are common to other presentations, other spiritual paths. I'm kind of reminded in some of the lectures, the guide does believe that there are personifications of evil, that there are spirits that are out to do us harm, which he calls the specialists, which gravitate to our negative qualities. And that's something that is very similar to C.S. Lewis in the Screw Tape Letters, if you ever read that. About it's a Christian book about how devils tempt human beings. Um, but evil is also thought of in many in traditions to be ignorance. In other words, no one commits evil deliberately, and I think that the guide uh, echoes that in many of the lectures that people do not willfully uh, commit evil because they don't really understand the gravity of what they're doing. This also ties into the idea of the fascination with creation, how the guide talked about how when you start creating something, it can be fascinating and exciting, even if it's negative. That's another powerful idea of where evil comes from. Now, the guide does believe that evil won't win. In the end, ultimately, everyone returns to God, even Satan. So the guide's conception of um, our world is not Manichaean. In other words, the fight of good against evil is ultimately will be won by the good forces. But I think what's probably the most significant um, lecture about evil talks about evil as being made up of several characteristics, one of which is separation. When things become separated, people are separated from each other. People are removed from one another, then evil can manifest. Also, materialism. And then finally, what the guide calls numbness and lack of control. Now, that I think is a very important and valuable idea about where evil comes from. When people are numb to their feelings or numb to other people, they are not able to control themselves and evil manifests. So these are just a few scattershot ideas and concepts about evil. And the final thing I want to say is that the guide says that evil is really powerful and strong when it's allied with positive qualities. So, in other words, that's why, for example, like the Nazi regime was so powerful because there are positive qualities. In other words, the ability to build a powerful army, to create weapons, to marshal soldiers. These are positive things which were turned in a negative direction. So evil by itself, in order to be strong, has to ally itself with positive qualities and with positive strengths and twist them or pervert them in the wrong direction. Well, I hope that that's been a little bit of food for thought. And so let me turn over this discussion to Aimee. And I might have to run out for a minute or two. My mom broke her hip at 99, so I'm a little bit in the position of a caretaker. And if she needs me, I'm gonna have to run. Okay. All right, Aimee.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. So I think I know some of you. I think I've seen some of you at Pathwork lectures when we used to be in person. I'm really excited. I have a cat here who's going to participate. He doesn't mean any harm, but he may walk in. I normally don't use PowerPoint because I don't find it useful, but as some of you know, when you have been to my lectures, I really like to use the whiteboard and to draw things out. I find it helpful in terms of simplifying some of the complex concepts in Pathwork. So we are going to work off of a PowerPoint, but it's really meant to serve as a guide. It's not to be reading off the slides per se. So if everyone is okay with that, if you're not, we should talk about that. Let's see. Okay, let me just let this person in the room. All right, can everyone see the slides? Yeah? One second. Yes. Are we good to go? Perfect. All right. So what I've done is about a few months ago, I woke up in the morning and I sort of had some sense to go back to the lectures and learn about evil and what the guide thinks of evil. And in part, I was inspired by what I was seeing, or what I have been seeing in just watching the news up until the election, and was sensing behaviors that pretty much all of us were engaging in that to me felt like evil. And so I wanted to sort of come back to the lectures and see if I could learn a little bit about what is going on in this particular time. And so I found 4 lectures in particular, 248, 134, 244, and one, I think it was 184. And each of those lectures focus in on some way about what evil is as it relates to how it lives in us, rather than sort of this separate entity that sort of is, that can influence us. How does evil live within us as human beings? And what do you do about it once you discover it? And so that was really the impetus in wanting to sort of understand it. And I found these 4 lectures. And so my objective in this discussion is to talk about evil, not just as a separate force or a separate entity, but a current of energy that lives in us. And that really is a function of consciousness. Whereas the less consciousness we have, the less awareness we have about ourselves, the more susceptible we are to use our life force energy in the direction of evil. Now, just notice even what you feel when I say the word evil, because it often elicits some other entity or maybe even some other person that you know. And it's very hard to even entertain the idea that evil could live within you. And so we're going to work out of the word evil and perhaps into other words like destructiveness or negativity. And the guide says those things are what evil is. So if the word evil doesn't sit well with you, we're going to move on to different words, but just notice how that even lives in you. Is there immediate rejection of it by saying, well, I'm not evil. That couldn't possibly be me. So the objective, again, is to understand what evil is, as the guide suggested is, to explore how these qualities may show up and live in us, and to understand a particular aspect called negative pleasure, and how understanding negative pleasure is the root out of our negativity. Because we don't do anything unless we get something out of it. And so when we act in ways that aren't necessarily in our best behavior or out of integrity, we must do it because we get some sense of pleasure out of it, albeit negative. And so understanding negative pleasure is a really important thing to understand as it relates to moving away from destructive behavior. So those are the objectives. And I want to just put some thoughts into your head before we start. So those of you who have read the lectures and or have done some work with me know that I talk about, and the guide talks about, the idealized self. And the idealized self is sort of who we think we need to be. It's our ideal sense of who we are, right? We never get angry. We do everything right. We always have the best intentions. We never put our needs first. I mean, whoever you think you should be, and even who you think you are, that is your idealized self. And you cannot explore your destructiveness through the lens of your idealized self. It won't let you, because it honestly doesn't think you have any evil in you. So, to the extent that you know that you have an idealized self, try very hard to not do this work through that part of yourself, because it will It will either deny it or it will reject it and then make you double down on your goodness as a way of sort of getting rid of it. So that's the first thing. The second thing the guide says is that we tend to, at least in Western culture, we tend to take a dualistic view of evil. We see things as good or bad, good or evil. And what we do in that place is we always try to land on the side of good, because that would make sense. If good is good and evil is evil, we want to be on the side of good. The problem with that is that we tend to fake it to be on the side of good, because sometimes we don't feel like being good. Sometimes we're not motivated in a pure way. And so we sort of, out of fear and guilt, we sort of compensate and over exaggerate in order to be good. And so stepping outside of this dualistic view that there is good and bad is a very helpful way of approaching our negativity. It's not so clear. We are neither good nor bad. We are in process, is sort of the way that I like to look at it. And then let's talk about guilt, because that feels like a really important thing when I work with people or when I even do my own work. As soon as I come across a quality I don't like about myself, I immediately go to a place of guilt. And guilt is an aspect of the mask. Guilt is actually a way to not take responsibility for oneself. Because if you tell me I've done something to you and I just say, oh, Jesus, I'm such a piece of shit, I'm awful. That's kind of the end of the subject. That will either elicit sympathy from the other person or it just ends the conversation. And so when you feel yourself feeling guilty as you discover certain negativities or destructive natures in yourself, know that that guilt is a way of not fully taking responsibility. What we want to get to is actual remorse. And remorse is a manifestation of the higher self, because remorse says, that's not who I am. I hurt this other person, and that's really not who I am and who I want to be. And I feel badly about hurting another person. That's very different than guilt. So just tune into yourself when you start to go to a place of guilt, as you start to explore these things in ourselves, and to trust that what we're trying to do is just give honest and direct expression of these shadow places in us. So those are some thoughts I just wanted to plant before we do so. And so here's your challenge as we begin. Trust that if you have evil in you, which you probably do, it is not all of you. And trust that, as if you try to become good by denying the evil within you, you're going to overcompensate and you're going to create sort of further harm to yourself and others because you're pretending to be something you're not. And trust that it's actually not the evil or the destructiveness in you that's bad, it's actually your attitude to it. So it's your denial of it, it's your diversion of your destructiveness, it's the hiding of it that's actually far more dangerous than the actual impulse or thing that you want to do or feel that's negative. So don't shy away from the work and trust that your self-respect and self-love actually comes from taking responsibility for all of you. That's how we get to love. To not deny who we are, but to actually own everything that we are and transform that into our higher self. And lastly, which is sort of the hardest to do, but really something I encourage you to do throughout this session, is keep trusting in your goodness. Know that you are inherently good. And to keep reminding yourself of that. And it's not a way to pat yourself on the back. It's a way to not come from the idealized self, which is a false sense of goodness, but to trust just in your innate higher self as you do this work.
Aimee, I have attended, I've seen some of these online, and I have engaged some with Pathwork lectures. Is your intention in terms of like later questions in terms of being able to engage with this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So and is that at the end, or how do you usually do that?
Yeah, so what I'll do is present this. This will take, I'm hoping, about 15, 20 minutes just to go through this, and then we'll open it up to discussion and answer any questions.
Super.
If there's something that's really just like, you're just like, I don't know what you're talking about, or you need clarification, just chime in. Okay. So it feels like it'd be helpful for us to all be working off of a particular definition of evil for the purposes of this conversation. And I tried to, I looked up the word evil in the dictionary just to see what came up. And the first thing that came up was opposition to God. That made perfect sense to me. But, that's obviously a sort of religious or theological idea of evil. And I wanted to find a more neutral definition. And what I came up with is, or what that guide helped me come up with is, if we assume that we are energy and consciousness, right? That we are life force energy, and we have a consciousness that directs that energy in whatever direction we direct it in, then evil is actually the distortion of that energy, or that misuse of our energy as a result of limited or distorted consciousness. And we're going to go into what that means. But what I want to do is sort of start with this idea that we have a current of energy that is our life force. It's a fairly neutral force, although it does want to move towards expansion and growth. And our consciousness, meaning how we use that energy based on what we know or don't know, directs where that energy goes. Right? So if we are fully awake and totally enlightened and completely self-aware, then most likely we're going to use all our energy towards creation and towards maturation and goodness, right? We're not enlightened beings. We're not fully awake. We're not very self-aware, although we're doing our best. And so, of course, we're going to be susceptible to using our energy towards things that are more stagnant or even destructive. But I want us all to think about evil for the purposes of this conversation as, we have consciousness and we have energy, and that energy can go towards good, or that energy can go towards destruction and stagnation. And if we are not aware enough, or if our awareness is distorted or limited, we are more likely to drive ourselves towards destruction and stagnation. So is everyone comfortable, at least on some level, with that definition? Great. Okay. So as I was thinking about this and I was reading the lectures, there's sort of what really is the origin of evil, like what makes our energy go in one direction or the other, And so there were three basic questions I had, which was, is evil born out of our own trauma and our wounding and just being alive, and the reality of being alive and all that comes with it, including a notion of death, and we don't understand it, right? So is evil born out of our wounding and our trauma? And the second thought I had is evil just an innate biological impulse? Like I'm sitting here, I don't want my cat to be on my lap, and he keeps jumping and biting my hand. Like it's an impulse for him to just bite. He's not happy. He doesn't like what's happening, right? So he's biting my hand. There's something innately biological in him that in my mind is cruel. In his mind, it's like, I'm just acting like a cat, right? So is there something innate in us that just makes us behave a certain way that is destructive or harmful? And on a spiritual level, is evil a force that we have to meet as a necessary aspect of our evolution? It's like sometimes we need tension in order to grow. We need to come up against an edge or an opposite figure to sort of create some tension for us to rise above it. And what I came up with is it's all three of these, right? And then there's the notion of, is it a spiritual entity outside of us that is meant to come in and inflict pain? That's possible too. But for purposes of these lectures and for our conversation, we're looking at evil in the context of these three things: that we have natural impulses as animals, that we do meet adversity and destructiveness as a way to emerge a better self, and that a lot of our destructive behavior does come from our wounding as children, often as children. So if we sort of try to understand how our evil is born, or our destructiveness is born out of our wounding, then the question is, well, how does that happen? Why does that happen? So we of all children were raised by somebody, right? And just by definition, most likely our needs were frustrated in some way. We either weren't held, we maybe never got to feel safe, we may have been raised in a hostile environment, We may not have had our needs met. We may have not been allowed to be who we are. You know, we may have been forced to eat and forced to go to the bathroom and forced to, you know, wear certain clothes, or, you know, there may have been pressure to be perfect. There may have been pressure to achieve. You know, all these things that a growing child is faced with. And what happens when a child is faced with frustration or pain, in some level, it's unbearable, particularly if there isn't an ability for the parent to really hold them in their pain. You know, a lot of times a child will cry and the parent will say, stop crying. There really isn't the space for that child to really say, I'm having a hard time. I don't understand why this is happening, right? So the pain is unbearable. But what also happens is there's some conflicting feelings that come up in the child towards the parent, whom they very much need and very much love. So on the one hand, this child feels hate and rage and anger, but it's their mommy or daddy or it's their caregiver, and they can't afford to feel those feelings. So not only are they feeling the pain of not getting what they want, but now they're feeling confused about all these feelings that live in them. So what's the best thing to do when you feel that way? Shut the system down. Shut the feelings down, you know, compensate where there's hate, show love, you know, where there's outrage, put a smile on your face, like do anything to make sure that these dark feelings underneath don't come to the surface. And this is the beginning of the distortion of our energy. This is the beginning of where destructiveness and negativity forms. Because as soon as something goes underground, it's bound to cause havoc for us, right? So what happens is the child eventually creates strategies and survival patterns to manage this environment that they're in. And I'm not going to go through them, but here are some examples of images, which is a few lectures in the pathwork, and then behaviors. And all of these behaviors are meant to be self-preserving, to protect the child, to protect them from never feeling that pain again, and to protect others from what's going on in that kid, right? Because that kid may want to kill, or that kid may want to scream and yell. And so they shut themselves down, not only to protect themselves, but to protect the caregiver from their wrath. So all of our survival strategies, whether it's like leaving or controlling or containing or submitting or being perfectionistic or being the good boy or the good girl or the achiever or the quiet one, all of this is a way to manage all these feelings that are sitting below. Because there's some way where the child believes, I can never let these out and I can never survive them if they do come out. So that's the origin, to some extent, of these behaviors. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of these behaviors are. And you know, it'd be easy to present to you things like hatred and hostility and you know, cruelty, the things that we can easily look on TV or see and say, oh my God, that's evil, that's bad. What the guide presents are these things that maybe you never thought of as destructive, but very much are, in fact, happen more often than some of the things we might see out in the world, right? Not, you know, most of us are not going to go actually physically kill someone, right? And so we see that and we think, oh my God, that's evil. And we don't do that, and therefore we aren't evil. But these kinds of things that I'm going to present are things that we're much more apt to do. And they're perhaps a little bit, I want to say more insidious, because murder is insidious, but they're insidious because they easily hide. They happen and we're not even aware that they're happening. So let's talk about them. The first one is control, which Alan talked about. And control really comes out of fear of helplessness and powerlessness. So a child in particular feels a tremendous amount of helplessness and powerlessness because to some extent they are. They cannot live on their own. They need these people that they are with. And so, you know, there's a sense of helplessness and powerlessness. As humans, we're also helpless because we live and we die, and we don't have a lot of control over that. I mean, I think we try to have control over it, but you know, we have voluntary functions in our body that we have some say over. And then there's parts of our body we have no say over. And that can feel terrifying on a daily basis. So that's not a function of our wounding. That's just a function of being human and not having control over our bodies all the time or our impulses all the time. You know, sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and I just have this impulse to like say something horrible. And it's like, okay. And it frightens them because they don't know where it's coming from. There's just some involuntary impulse. And so all of that leads to a sense of helplessness. And when we feel helpless, what do you imagine we do? We try to rid that helplessness with controlling behaviors. So we may control others, we may control ourselves, we may restrict ourselves, we may spend all our energy to negate that thing we're most afraid of. So instead of our energy moving towards creation, our energy moves towards self-preservation. Now, one might ask, well, why is that evil? It's evil because you're using your life force energy to negate something that's inevitably going to happen, rather than use your energy to impacting the world, to creating in the world, right? And controlling behaviors is also destructive because you're controlling other people. You're trying to impose your will on others, right? And you can imagine if that has either happened to you or see in the world, the impact that has to impose control on other people. I mean, the most extreme would be like a dictator or authoritarian, right? So control is an aspect of destructiveness, whether it lives in us individually and how we treat ourselves or how we treat others. Numbness, as Alan talked about, is probably one of the most important because it's really, I think, the ground floor of what creates our destructiveness. And the guide talks about 3 stages of evil. The first is numbness. 3 stages of numbness, sorry. The first is numbness towards the self. And when we numb ourselves, it means we won't let ourselves feel our feelings. So we may numb out literally through alcohol or drugs or sex or money or achievement or other people. But in essence, what we're doing is we've cut ourselves off from our feeling because to do so is the only way to survive. So we alienate ourselves from our own pain. You can imagine the impact that has. The second stage of numbness is numbness towards others. And the guide says this is really the cause of most evil in the world today, because this shows up as passivity or indifference. So when we walk down the street and we see someone who's homeless, we might have a feeling, but not enough of a feeling to stop and say, oh my God, this is so horrible. I have to do something about this now. There's a way where we have somehow built a little bit of a wall between sort of an initial feeling and actually doing something with it, because we don't feel it enough, right? And it's not because we're bad people, it's because we've numbed out. If we've numbed ourselves, if we alienate from our own pain, we're really not going to be able to feel the pain of others. So indifference and passivity through numbing as a form of numbing is a destructive quality in our world. I would say it is a affliction of the world in this particular moment in time, and probably always. And then the third stage of numbness is actual cruelty. So this is someone that goes out into the world and, creates harm to another person. And it's a form of numbness because you almost wipe away all of the feeling. You strengthen the feeling by inflicting cruelty. It almost rises above the pain, and it's sort of just, so we don't want to get to cruelty. The way we get to cruelty is to go through indifference and passivity. We don't want to get to that place. So the only thing we can do is be willing to feel our feelings. So we have to denumb in order for us to denumb from our world, and then in order for us to stop cruelty in that way. So that's numbness. The next one is around having a particular grievance mentality or victim mentality. Now, I always struggle with this in particular because sometimes I get a sense when I read the guide that there is no victim, that there's no such thing as a victim. I am not clear on that. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's what the guide says. But from the perspective of using grievance or victimization as a way to either shirk responsibility or stay in the position of blame and accusation, that is when it becomes destructive, right? Because when we come from a place of grievance and it's like, you did this to me, you did this to me, you owe me, I'm not going to take responsibility for my life, you have to give this to me. You can see the impact that that has on the world in so many different ways. So to the extent that you are hanging on to a grievance towards someone or something, you know, it's important to acknowledge that, yes, there was a grievance, and yes, you may have been victimized, but to ask yourself, where am I still coming from that place? And how is it no longer serving me and no longer serving the world? What are you using it for? What are you using the grievance orientation for? Is it for what purpose? So the next concept is, as Alan mentioned, materialism. And materialism is really, it's not so much the reliance on material, although that certainly is an aspect of it. It's the idea that our identity, like me in this body, is all there is. Because if I only believe that this is all there is, then I'm going to do everything I can to preserve it. Right? So my reliance on my own material existence will make me send all my energy to ensuring that nothing ever happens to this identity. Right? So the energy doesn't go anywhere else except towards negating, you know, again, pushing off something that is inevitably true, which is this will go away. This material body will go away. Right? So in essence, I think what the guide is saying is that a lack of spiritual life, a lack of understanding that there's something beyond the material creates, you know, and you can see it with greed. You know, you can see it with sort of, you know, people collecting as much stuff as they can because that's a badge of something, right? So we're using material to value ourselves, right? So we have to see, you know, where am I over relying on my own identity as sort of all meaning. And I think it's the last one, maybe a couple more, is inertia. And this in itself is a whole lecture. I think it's one, I don't remember which lecture it is, but inertia is really the freezing or stagnation of our life force. And this is when we don't do what we came here to do, whatever that is. Whatever that is, whatever the task is, whether the task is an internal task or an external task, if we are not engaging in that task, we are in inertia, and that's a form of stagnation or freezing of life force energy. And what's interesting about the guide says that inertia is worse than actual active cruelty. Because inertia is just, it's like you have this capacity to show up in the world and deliver in the world, whatever that means, and you're choosing not to, for whatever reason. You know, maybe you're doing it out of spite, like, well, my parents hurt me, and or life hurt me, or God hurt me, and so I'm going to hurt them by not going all in life. So our unwillingness to engage, to bring our gifts to the world, to bring our work to the world, again, whatever that means, that unwillingness, that inertia, that opposition to doing our life's work is a form of evil. And collusion and complicity was within this article. And, you know, collusion and complicity can be sort of on a grandstand of like, you know, what's happening in the world now and where are we sitting back and not saying anything. But it could also happen in our individual life where we're not standing up for ourselves. For whatever reason, if someone tells us the way it is, and we don't say, actually, that's not the way it is for me, then we are willing to collude with that other person, because somewhere in us we say, if I stand on my own, if I speak my truth, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose this other person. So we become complicit and we collude with someone else's version of who we are. So as long as we are unwilling to stand in our own integrity, even if we lose someone as a result. And that's hard, but even if we lose someone, that coming home to ourselves is far more important than giving ourselves away so that someone else doesn't leave us. So a few more. I think, we sort of just talked about this in terms of self-betrayal and self-alienation, where we give ourselves away because we fear that that's what we have to do in order to stay safe or in connection. The denial of the spontaneous self is more the way that we hide who we are. So we hide our impulses, we hide our playfulness, we hide our sexuality, we hide our just our spontaneity at all, because when we feel like we have to be a certain way in order to be okay in the world, one way to do that is to contain our body, is to contain our spontaneity. Because spontaneity could get us into trouble, because what if I do something in my spontaneous self? What if I say something? What if there's all this fear that if I really just allow my free spirit to come forward, that somehow I'm going to lose. So the denial of the spontaneous self is almost like you're cutting off your higher self. You're cutting off your aliveness in order to be in the world. And you were brought here to be fully alive. So what's the impact on the world when we show up at 50%? Imagine what the world could look like if we showed up at 100% or even 80%. These last two, I think, are the ones that trigger me the most, and I think are what maybe drove me to this lecture. The first is, confusion, distortion, half-truth, and hypocrisy. And all I have to do is turn on the TV, and I am living confusion, distortion, half-truth, and hypocrisy. And it's maybe because I experienced sort of gaslighting as a kid, like this to me just feels horrific. Because what the intention is to not reveal the full truth, because there's something potentially inconvenient about that. So if you watch one news channel, you're going to get a particular truth. If you watch another news channel, you're going to get another particular truth. Now, there may be a truth in all of them, but there's an intention to distort and confuse for some reason that is probably nefarious. It's probably not very kosher or pure. And the impact that misinformation or that half-truths or confusion or distortion does is it may bring down our society. I mean, I don't mean to be that extreme, but that's how it feels. The confusion it creates, right? And it's all for the purpose of not being in truth. Which begs the question, what is wrong with the truth? Why don't we want to know the truth? What would we have to give up in order to be in the truth? Because the spiritual law is, in order for us to move into anything creative or move forward in life, we are going to have to give something up. We're going to have to feel uncomfortable. We're going to have to make some sacrifice in order to move forward. So there's a reason why we don't want to know the truth. And maybe the reason why we don't want to know the truth is because we don't want to be in the discomfort of what the truth might bring. And the last is self-righteousness, which drives me bonkers. Like I when I feel it coming towards me, like I feel something like in my diaphragm and in my throat where I just want to scream and yell at the person, right? And I'm sure when I do it, the person wants to do the same. It feels so disingenuous. It feels there is an imposition that says you must think this way, or you must be this way, and if you don't, you are bad, right? And there is a feeling of superiority that comes out of us when we are in self-righteousness. I am better than you. I am more educated than you. I am more whatever, fill in the blank, right? And anytime that we are creating separation in a dialogue, we are not in our higher self. And self-righteousness, by definition, creates separation. You know, I don't know if maybe some of you have had different examples, but I've never been in a situation where someone has been self-righteous with me and I have felt closer to them or even more interested in what they're saying. In fact, I'm less interested, which is a shame because probably what they're talking about is really important. But the energy with which it's coming at me is a forcing energy. And when we force our energy upon others, we're not in that higher self. We're imposing our will onto others. So when you feel superior and you feel morally, superior, it's good to check in with yourself and say, what is actually going on for me here? What is this about? Right? And if you don't have humility when you're speaking to people, it's another good thing. Check in with yourself. Like what? Because there is a good possibility that we are wrong sometimes. Right? And to know that we are not all knowing, that we may have an opinion about something or a feeling about something, and we may feel outraged about it, that's all healthy. But it's the imposition, it's the forcing, it's the making someone feel less than that is to be tuned into. And it's interesting because the guide calls self-righteousness repressed guilt, which we impose on another person. So I'm going to make you bad so I don't have to feel my badness. I'm going to tell you how insensitive you are so I don't have to feel my own insensitivity. So that resonates with me, that self-righteousness is a form of repression of our own guilt that then we put onto someone else. That was helpful for me to read to understand my own self-righteousness. So lastly, fear, pride, and self-will. And the guide kind of talks of this as like the mothership of evil and destructiveness. And actually says that fear, pride, and self-will are worse than any of the things I just talked to you about. And the reason why they're worse is they're all forms of denial, right? So fear says, I will not be able to survive looking at my ugliness or my shadow, so I'm not going to look at it. Pride says that these things don't even live in me. I don't have destructiveness. I don't have evil, right? There's no way that pride's going to let you feel the humiliation or vulnerability of self-exploration. And self-will says, life is my way. I don't see reality for what it is in this moment. I'm going to see it the way I want it to. And in this way, it's going to be very hard to accept ourselves as anything else but how we see ourselves. So if we are in our fear, pride, and self-will, we are essentially in a form of denial. And when we're in denial, we cannot really look at the things in us that we need to look at. All right, last slide. So great. Okay, so now we've talked about, we've established a working definition of evil. We've talked about that in part, evil is born out of our wounding and trauma and our response to it, which makes us create all sorts of defensive strategies to ensure that we never feel that pain again. And that those defense patterns, while they may protect us, create all sorts of havoc in the world and to ourselves. So now it's like, okay, well, why don't we just get rid of this stuff? Why don't we just stop doing that? Well, it's hard to do that in part because in our negativity, we feel powerful. And when we feel powerful, we feel pleasure. The problem is that it's not real power and it's not real pleasure, right? So if you think about some of these qualities like self-righteousness as an example, if underneath the self-righteousness is a feeling of helplessness around injustice, right? Or a feeling of powerlessness, then any taste of power you can get, you're going to take it, right? So even though cruelty is cruel, at least you feel like, oh, I got power now. I can inflict pain on someone who inflicted on me. Like, I feel better. So we feel, quote, powerful and pleasure in our negativity. And that's what makes it so hard to get rid of. Because it's like, you're asking me to get rid of the pleasure I feel and the power I feel. Why would I do that? Because underneath it is I'm going to feel powerless and I'm going to have to feel pain. Why would I want to do that? And yet anyone that's done this work and studied core pathwork knows that the only way out is through. Right? So we have to be willing to give up the negative pleasure and the pseudo sense of power that we get from our negativity, and trust that if we feel the powerlessness and we feel the helplessness and we feel the pain and we let ourselves have our impulses, not act them out, but just acknowledge we have them and realize that it's one thing to have an impulse, it's another thing to act out that impulse. It's like if we just give ourselves permission to acknowledge and accept and express who we are in a safe way, that is far better than all the ways in which we're dancing over here, sending our energy towards, survival, that ultimately don't really allow us a full life. So the task really is to understand that this lives in you, to understand how this lives in you, to understand what it's covering up. Like, what is my controlling behavior masking? What's it covering up? What's it helping me not have to feel? What is my self-righteousness covering up? What's my cruelty covering up? What is it? If we assume that all negative behaviors to some extent mask a feeling that we think we cannot feel because we will die if we do, or we'll feel shame if we do, then the work is for us to feel those feelings. And by doing that, what we do is we take this life force energy that's been flowing in the wrong direction as a result of limited consciousness, and we steer it back in the direction it's meant to go in, which is towards expansion and growth. And this is a lifetime of work in 4 lectures, but this is the task at hand. So with that, it's a lot to sort of bring to you, but hopefully you feel like something is starting to land here. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to anyone that has any questions or any comments. And yeah, thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. If you want me to go back to a slide, we can do that, but I'm just going to bring everyone back. Joseph, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Aimee. Just a couple, first few, I read just clarification. So, I find that asking for clarification, so around, I really resonate with I guess I hadn't seen that before. There's a lot I haven't explored in the Pathwork lectures. This guilt, around what you call guilt. Can we use, and I'm not opening, I don't think any of us are interested. I'm not interested in discussion of, getting into semantics around the definition, but often I've experienced it myself and others and those I work with. Can we say shame as well? I've heard in the Pathwork, I heard you repeat it. Remorse is where we're looking. That's the angle. I think it is just kind of semantics. Sometimes I'm familiar with the different definitions, but they do vary. It's weird even within psychology and stuff. But I think there's a place. What's coming to mind in particular is a community of men I'm in, and we've done some anti-racism work and films and talking about privilege and feeling that in our bodies and having discussions around that, and that how some of us really get slowed down in terms of just people share about shame around that issue. And in this group right now, it's all white-bodied folk. So, and I'm thinking that they can be interchangeable, shame and guilt, in the way around evil.
Yeah. So the guide, there is actually a lecture called, I think it's Guilt, Shame, and Remorse. And the guide does differentiate them. You know, and that that guilt is more of a mask quality, because guilt is like, I am bad, right? It's just like this, I'm bad, I feel guilty. It's more, in some ways, guilt is a little bit more narcissistic. It's a little bit more about like, you feel bad that you know, it's kind of about you.
Right. As opposed to the act. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
and then shame is actually getting closer to the truth, because shame is like, you feel, you know, shame can have a historical place where like, you know, oh, I'm bad and I'm feeling my badness, right? But at least we're starting to feel something. The energy is sort of moving towards sort of what the higher self quality is actual remorse, where remorse is like, again, I did something. It is out of alignment with who I am. I'm not going to shame myself. I'm not going to make myself bad, but I'm going to take responsibility for it. It's not who I want to be, and I don't like the pain I've inflicted on someone else. That's a very different thing than shame and guilt. And so, you know, if I were to draw it, I would sort of say guilt, shame, and remorse is really sort of moving us from kind of the more superficial aspect to a more higher self quality. And I don't think enough of us feel, well, I don't want to say that. I don't get a sense in the world that we really are in touch with remorse the way that we could be. And if we were, I think we might live in a very different world. Because when we do feel remorse, we tend to make changes more quickly. We tend to agree to changes because we get it. Right? So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I think I need to sit with that. That was rich. I'm going to skip the rest of the, just one thing. I was struck in this presentation, which I'm finding really valuable. I need to, you know, sit with and go back to the lectures and really sit and ask for guidance, is the reticence early on to sort of really like, I feel comfortable, and maybe, you know, you can tell me what the pathwork says about this. I have evil in me. And I heard you sort of equivocate that. I know you were sort of opening the door energetically, or it seemed that way, and mentally, cognitively, to like, let's ease into this. This was the beginning, but it does seem to, seems important somehow for, to sort of, to say that, I can be that person. I may not be that. I may not be, as was pointed out earlier, I may not be one of the, you know, the messengers here, you know, in terms of negative force that's been, you know, assigned that or taken that on. But seems, yeah, it just seems awful important for us to be able to talk about that and accept that. Not biological, but that this person acting this way, I have that inside me.
Yes. And I think that the more that I think that's why I started with this notion of like, you really can't do this from the place of that idealized self, because even the idealized self may say like, yeah, I have evil in me, and there's still a disconnect to it. You know, we have to really feel the place in us where we know we've done something, or we know that we're thinking something that sort of is, and not to make ourselves bad in it, but to really hold ourselves accountable for it, and not shame ourselves for it, from it, but just to say like, okay, this lives in me. I have a quality that's really selfish. You know, I have a quality in me that really doesn't care about a lot of people. Or I have a quality that wants what I want, and, you know, like, it doesn't really matter that someone else might want something else. Or I am indifferent. I can watch the news and see something and be like, well, that's sad, but next. I mean, you know, these are the things. That's why the word evil is so tricky, because it's so easy to personify evil as sort of very evil acts where things are inflicted on other people, like Nazis, or, you know, it's like, that's right. But it's like the stuff that we do on a daily basis that maybe no one even else really sees. It's like, the reason why it's important to look at it is not because other people are seeing it, is because it's sitting in us and it's creating guilt. and it's making us compensate, and then we're not showing up in the world really as we should be. We're faking it. And so the guide says it's really important to own this stuff in us, because we should do it for ourselves so that we show up feeling better about ourselves. So it's not even for the world per se. I mean, it is ultimately, but it's like, you know, we're all sitting here hiding parts of ourselves, right? And that has an impact. It just has an impact on everything we do.
Well,
So
yeah, precisely. So energetically, if there's all this hate or, you know, this, and I feel myself, you know, getting caught in that, I find it helpful. I have the ability to go there. And if I don't identify and work with that and do my work around that, when someone is some of these headings that you've labeled manifestations or of evil, then when someone is self-righteous with me in my communities, if I've been working with these aspects, I don't have to. I was struck a little bit. You said, you know, I have this reaction. Of course, we're human. We're on this level. We do have our responses, but I don't have to respond to that person with get off your freaking pedestal, whatever. Um, I can actually be a little bit more neutral in that space.
yeah, and thank you for that. And I want to make sure that other people have a chance as well. But I think what you're saying is really important, which is the fact that I have a reaction to it. There's a piece of work for me to do in there. What's that about in me that I'm so outraged by, you know, by their self-righteousness, right? What is it that I'm not wanting to see or feel? So anytime we're triggered by something, there's something in us to do about it, not just about what the other person's doing. So I would agree. I mean, so thank you for those points. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or comments or?
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, you know, in my personal work and working with workers, that it's always helpful for me, and in the work that I do, to have remembrance that whatever your flavor of distortion is, whether it's power over, rage, rejection, withdrawal, whatever your go-to is, you know, in that lower self aspect, is to know that these were initially, in a pure form, divine rays, and that they become inverted and distorted, you know, through the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that, you know, that withdrawal, you know, that the divine essence is serenity, or divine essence, the emotion of love, which is the pure form before it gets inverted into the rage. And it's always helpful to know that this is a journey, you know, just to work through these lower self aspects and to stay grounded, or to get grounded in the wisdom and the knowledge of the original source. Like, why is this here for me? What do I need to change to invert it back to its original source?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I think, you know, when I teach this, I always say that, like, we don't pick our defensive strategies out of the air. We take them from our own assets. We take them from our gifts. If we have a withdrawal strategy, it's because we really do have the capacity to actually step back. We do have this capacity for serenity and this holding a higher perspective, you know. And so, you know, that's why it's so important to not come from the idealized self, because if we come from the higher self, when we look at our lower self, then we can say, I get this was sort of an energy current sort of going on its own, and then something stopped it and diverted it and inverted it. And it needs to just be transformed back into its original source, which was higher self. So absolutely, that's so important, you know. And it's a great way to also not go to the place of I'm bad, because it's not the truth. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Anyone else have any thoughts or, yep, I see Galaxy A10E, which could be, yeah.
I hadn't realized I was muted. Yeah, well, thank you so much for selecting these lectures. It's really there really is so much in this lecture to learn and really to dissect and to really, most importantly, to put it into practice.
Mhm.
One aspect of the lecture that struck me, I guess, being that I am consider myself a religious person or a spiritual person, was the aspect of that the guy talks about of the personification of evil, and how we human being represent both the good and the evil in this earthly plane, and also the fact that how like Satan personifies the evil forces, while Satan himself does not really fear or kind of consider God his enemy or his adversary,
Mhm.
but Jesus, or the Christ consciousness, basically the force that you
Love.
talked about, this
Mhm.
enlivening force of love, truth, and life, that his mission is, or is basically filling the void, projecting forth, and how Satan is, who he really considers his enemy, is Jesus Christ, or the embodiment of this force, which is here on earth, who is Jesus, and how he basically his fight is against this force that represents God here on earth, and so it's really so much, and then how. Basically, what we need to do, what we can do, is by, like you mentioned earlier, by really going inside and really dissecting or working with these contrary currents, or this petrified energy that is stuck, that is basically impeding the force from projecting forth, and really going there, and with these wrong conclusions and mistakes and misinterpretation from our childhood, and really undo that. And the bottom line at the end, what I understood that the guy suggests, is that the key just then to surrender to this force, to just allow it to carry us forward, and just basically just permit it to drive us and lead through us.
Yeah.
Once we reach that level of purity and self-purification. Yeah.
Yes.
So that aspect was important to me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and in so many ways, so much of our protection is to protect how much we love.
Yeah.
Right? It's and in some ways our lower self is the rejection of love, but in other ways it's a loving thing to do, because it's trying to protect us, right? But it's distorted. That's not that's not the way to be in love, right? But there's all these distortions about how do I stay safe, because that's the most loving thing I can do for myself, is to stay safe, right? Or how can I stay in connection, because that's the most loving thing I can do to still have connection. But we do it in a way that's not in truth. We do it in a way that forces us to contort who we are.
Yeah,
I say yes because saying yes is going to get you to stay, but what I really feel is no. That's self-betrayal. Not only harms me, but it doesn't allow me to really be in a love relationship with that other person, because I'm giving myself away in order to do it. And somewhere underneath, I know that. And so I'm either punishing them or me, and then what? We're not in love. So it's such an important point, thank you, about love being what this is sort of all ultimately about. Love and light. That's what it's about.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, I really feel the truth of what you said, Aimee, about showing up. That in some sense, showing up, bringing what you have, everything you have to life, is the antithesis of evil, right? I mean, that's the simplest way to formulate it. That whatever, that we have the guide sometimes says this, and, you think that the guide always says, well, these are mere words unless you really feel them, unless you really feel the depth of these words. And when the guide says that we have such opportunities to fulfill ourselves, such opportunities for self-development here on earth that we don't have in other places, right? Why are we here? Because of the obstacles to our own development. And because by showing up in spite of these obstacles, we create love and unity and strength, and we bring, as you said, Juan, we bring the light into the void. You know, I'm taking care of my mom, and she's 99. She can barely walk. She just had surgery, and she has very little muscle mass. And someone once said, you have to bring your muscles into old age. Bring your muscle mass. So like you're showing up, and that's just the physical plane, right? Physical plane, you have to show up with everything for your body. Then the emotional plane, you have to show up and work on these contradictions and these unhealthy currents. You have to show up emotionally. And spiritually, you have to ask for guidance and ask for help and be receptive. And intellectually, of course, you have to reject dumb and stupid arguments, and you have to have the intellectual perspicacity to, like you said, Aimee, to dispel half-truths and hypocrisy, misconceptions, to really understand and analyze things, to educate yourself. So I'm just kind of feeling emotionally how the opportunities that we have to grow and how beautiful that they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So much so.
It's also interesting that, the path work, it's sort of dogmatic. I'm not dogmatic. What I mean is it's sort of, it feels like a slog sometimes. It feels like a lesson, like a school, that you have to read these lectures and, work on yourself. But while you are making the positive intent to do those things, to work on yourself, something else wonderful is happening in your soul.
Yes.
That makes you freer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very liberating. The feeling is very liberating, for sure.
Well, it's almost like, well, what else are you going to do? Like, what else are you going to do but try to uncover these distortions? And, it's like, do you really have something better to do? I mean, I don't mean that in like in a cheeky way. I mean it like, it's like these obstructions, these distortions in us are causing us so much suffering, and they're affecting the world as we know it. And we have the opportunity to change that, and we do that by doing our own work. And it's not about becoming obsessive or narcissistic about our work, because the guide says, seeking can become an avoidance strategy like anything else. So it's not about that. It's about really sort of understanding these things and then sort of putting them to work always by just becoming more self-aware. Right. So in the moment you do it, it's like when you bring it to consciousness, it's like, oh, I'm doing it. Why am I doing it? Because I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? I'm afraid that someone's going to judge me. Okay, well, and then there you go. Suddenly you're creating a new pathway to do it differently. And so in that way, it becomes sort of exciting. It becomes sort of like a maze or a game, not a game, but yeah, a game. We're going to get to the next level. I really encourage these 4 lectures, like to read them and read them often and take notes, because I mean, that's the way I read the lectures, but they're so rich in terms of, they're just so rich in terms of just the understanding, and then also the path with which to take to work through them. I recommend any lecture, but these 4 together I thought were really helpful. Anyone else? Comments, questions? I just want to reiterate, going back to this sort of impulses, is that, we need to learn to contain, and containment is more of a core energetics concept, which is like to be able to build our container enough to tolerate kind of the energetic charge in our body. Because if we don't, we're going to act it out. We're going to throw it off of us, right? Or we're going to totally withdraw. And we have to give ourselves permission to feel the things that we judge about ourselves, whether it's hate or cruelty or selfishness or spitefulness. It's we don't want to act them out, but we need to bring them to consciousness. We need to share with someone, I feel hate in my heart, or I feel the place in me that wants to punish another person, or I feel the place that wants to and actually did go humiliate that person. Like the more that we do it, the more we out ourselves, the more free we are to actually work through them. The more we hide it, again, the guide says what's really evil is the denial of the impulse more than the impulse itself, so long as you don't act the impulse out.
Yes, Amy, but what about if this impulse is towards yourself? You know, what about if the impulse is just to be lazy or to, you know, not given fully to your higher self, or to, you feel yourself black and you don't know how to unblock yourself and you go around it, you basically avoid it. You know, what with somebody else, it's a little bit easier because you can see it, you can feel it, you can stop yourself by doing it, or you can acknowledge it. But I feel more often than not, those impulses first go towards ourselves.
Yeah, and I think with support, we can ask ourselves, why am I being lazy? Why am I in inertia? What is that about for me? Because if it's not that I'm actually lazy, then there must be some reason why I'm not able or willing, most likely willing, to move forward. And there must be some conflict there. You know, a lot of people want to move forward, but they recognize that to do so, they may have to take a step away from something, and they don't want to feel the loss. Some people want to step forward, but they think if they step forward, they're somehow going to be responsible and obligated, and they don't want that responsibility, right? So we move fast from the I'm lazy when we start to say, is there anything that I'm conflicted about in taking a step forward? Right? What would I have to give up if I step forward? And what would I have to step into if I step forward? And what are my feelings about those things? Right? Because if I don't trust that I can survive loss, then I'm not going to go towards something if it means stepping away from something too. And if I can't tolerate uncertainty, or I can't, you know, or I don't want the responsibility that comes with being responsible, then I'm not going to step forward. But if we just write ourselves off as I'm lazy, well, then that's like the same thing of saying I'm guilty, right? It's like a non-starter. So whether the impulse is towards oneself or towards the world, the questions are the same, which is like, what am I up to? Why am I doing this? What am I conflicted about? You know, where am I in that I don't want to place? Does that help? I can't see you on the screen. I'm sorry, Teresa. So I hope that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it is helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think to add a little bit more to that, to what Teresa mentioned about the inertia, I mean, for basically seeing from, you know, from the topic that is in discussion, from what you discussed, Amy, then the inertia, I think the thing to do, as we know, as you talked about, inertia comes to be, like, as you said, a form of evil, meaning petrified energy that is stuck there, that is impeding the force from progressing forward. So the thing I think to do is, in my opinion anyway, to just basically feel that, you know, sit with that inertia, see how we feel to be lazy and unproductive. Does that bring you joy? Does that bring you satisfaction? And if it doesn't, then wouldn't you want to free yourself from that? And I think the way the guide explains is just by really sitting with that and feeling it and living through it, instead of maybe denying it or masking it with some other pretest or something else. You know, just basically feel with that, sit with that, feel it, see how it feels to be that way, and just be with it. You know,
Yeah.
and I think eventually, just by observing that reaction in you, that feeling in you, slowly you can liberate yourself, and or at least to a higher level, to a level where you can deal better with that, you know, with that quality, you know, quality, if it can be called that.
Yeah, and you know, going back to where we started, like so many of these things are born out of pain, right? And to the extent that I know the places that I have inertia, or where I feel kind of a certain amount of laziness, I experience it as like underneath kind of all my excitement about life is a certain resignation and sadness and collapse. You know, because somewhere in my history, it's like there was a place I got really disappointed. And I think I just sort of I think there was a little bit of hopelessness, or what's the point? And every once in a while, I'm very aware of it in my body. And it's usually around like not really taking action, not wanting to make a move, not really wanting to act. And so it's not just about overriding, it's about allowing yourself to just be with that place that's like, oh, there's a part of me that just thinks, what's the point? Like there's a part of me that got really hurt and gave up. And here it is, it's showing up in my laziness, or it's showing up in the inertia. And not to shame it, but just to be like, okay, this would be a natural reaction to disappointment, to say, what's the point? But that's not the truth. It was just my experience of what happened, or my reaction to the experience. And so as an adult, I can be with that little kid in me who feels disappointed and feels like there's no point, and be with her in it and say, well, that maybe that's not fully true. So it's thank you for saying that, Juan, because it is about asking yourself questions, but it also is about getting in touch with the distortion and just being with it and understanding where it came from.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the power of those folks, and I'm talking about, like famous folks, but any individual who does choose into this and carries a light and a vibrancy in those higher self qualities. And I know for myself, it's a continuous process of, and how powerful that is in, just how powerful, like in the sense of, if I get stuck, when I'm stuck, I want that. There's so many examples, it seems, from my view, of how things seem set up to sort of reinforce the negative pleasure. So, and the power of one individual, and I'm not thinking of Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, those are tremendous examples, but just a person who ventures into this uncertainty, this last part, in being with what is, and then working their process, asking for assistance with it, and how that energetically just is an example. It's like, to me, it's like, I want that. I don't want the false serenity. I want my light to shine like that. I want that peace that's authentic.
Yes.
I want that goodness that comes through that person's countenance and essence, and all the other qualities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Courage, authentic courage, whatever that means, to each one of us. So, and for some reason, that was coming up for me.
Thank you. So I'm aware of the time, and I just, maybe in the last few minutes, any final comments or questions? Has this been, is there, I guess my question would be, and you don't have to answer it, but maybe answer it to yourself, like, are you leaving with something? Are you leaving with an idea or a understanding, or, a question that you have that kind of continues you on your journey as you look at kind of the lower self, and you look at, your destructiveness, or your negativity, or even negative pleasure, and to begin to sort of, or to choose to no longer, if you are, to choose to no longer deny it, right? Or resist it, or make yourself bad for it, but to embrace it. Say, wow, I have this thing in me. It's really interesting. And I feel really alive when I do it, right? And the moment you feel really alive when you're doing something that you otherwise know is not a good thing, like you're in your lower self and you're feeling the negative pleasure of it. And that in itself is a huge step forward, because now you have the awareness. And then you get to make the choice, am I willing to give this up? Knowing that what I might feel on the other side of it may be really painful and hard. So that's my wish for you, is that you leave here tonight with, some new or, more sort of expanded understanding of the work of exploring the lower self.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Usually I call on people and kind of put them on the spot, but we don't have to do that. I mean, I encourage anybody who wants to say something to go ahead and say it. I just feel that there's been such a great amount of wealth of information in this presentation. I think that, the concept of evil in the lectures is much more sophisticated than most notions of evil. And to really think about it using the material that Aimee has so well provided and summarized is really very valuable and is going to help everyone. And there is such a great byproduct that comes with studying the lecture. Something just kind of changes in you. There's a freeing up happens in your energy. Even if you're not trying to do it consciously, the more you kind of try to understand these concepts and try to parse them, it's like a kind of liberating, good energy field sort of kind of envelops you. That's how I feel about it anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Me too.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to say hi. That hey, that I feel like it's very easy. You know that expression, you spot it, you've got it. Yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like it's, I watch a lot of news programs or, in the political scene, and I'm, really honed in on a lot of that. And when I see someone coming from a place of distortion or, the negative pleasure and all that stuff that we've talked about today, I feel like it's so easy for me to see it coming. It just, oh, I see what you're doing there and all that. But internally,
right.
Forget about it.
Yes.
That's why when you talk about it in this way, it gives me a little bit of better understanding of self-reflection.
Yes.
But I feel like, the evil and all that stuff, that's for those crazy people out there,
That's
crazy
right.
but I've got it too, and it's a little harder for me to feel it and see it.
That's so important, that whenever resonates with you, you have a kinship with in some way. And, the guide always says that, and this is something that, of course, is common to Christianity, that, the best way to avert evil or to avoid it is to practice your spiritual growth. And that when you have a vibe of truth, the evil can't really touch you or harm you. I mean, this is a countless metaphor in movies and books that unless you let the evil in some way, shape, or form, it can't touch you. So the idea being that the more you show up in life, the more you bring yourself to life, the more you create a energetic field of love and strength that evil bounces off of or can't really, you don't hook in.
Yeah, and I also just want to say one thing that, I'm trying to do, and I invite you to do, is like, after reading these lectures and putting it together, the moment I see the sort of binary kind of low-hanging fruit demonization in the political world, like, I call it out if I can. So the moment someone's calling someone a Nazi or calling someone a racist, or it's just so simplified, it's become so, it's like, if I can, I will step in. And it's not to debate the content, it's to ask the question. It's like, what are you doing? Like, okay, so you've just called that person a Nazi and you've just called that person a racist. Now what are you going to do? What are we supposed to do? So there's an opportunity, I think, for us to, in the public sphere, to the extent we want to or decide to step in our communities or in our circles. And when you see it, say something. Say, where do you want to go with this? Where does the binary either or, all or nothing, dualistic good and bad, like, where is it taking us besides sort of nowhere, except everyone sort of becomes more tribal in that. So that's my hope too, is that, there may be some incentive here in your own circles where you see it to say it. But again, to Kathy's point, but keep it with yourself, keep the focus on you. That's where the change can come. So I did see a note about sharing slides. I think it said sharing, but I didn't see the rest of it. I am happy to share the slides if you'd like them. I probably will clean them up a little bit. So if you would like them, if you could just let Alan know that because I don't have all of your emails, if you could just let Alan know.
We could put them on our website, nypathwork.org.
Oh, all right. Well, then there you go. So that would be the way to do it. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So fun talking about evil, and just good to be with you. And I, yeah, hope to see you in the future at another lecture. Beverly, it's so good to see you. All my New York City peeps who I haven't seen in over a year. So good to see you.
You too.
Yeah. Alan, is there anything else before we end?
I don't think so, friends. Tracy and I will be having another Pathwork evening. We're going to be looking at lecture 113, which is called Self-Identification. And I will send out a email blast about that. And that is, that's coming up. And I guess that's it.
Awesome.